Hello everyone and welcome to this new video in which I continue my OSCP technical guide. And actually this is gonna be the last video on the series because we've covered a lot of material, and now as the final video we will cover a bit about the miscellaneous modules that we did not cover. We'll talk about challenge labs, we'll talk about expectation on the exam and the final exam and things of the sort. So this is sort of like a big finish to the series. This does not mean that the video on OSCP preparation will end. After this I will do more in-depth technical video on the specific techniques that I mentioned previously, but in terms of the general overview of OSCP, this is the last video. So we can start reading the blog post. So to finish off, there are some modules that are simply not required for the exam itself. These modules are listed below and I've grouped them within the miscellaneous area. So it's copyright, general course information, introduction to cybersecurity, effective learning strategies. These are like really introductory, so you don't really need to know them. Of course, you need to read about copyright, about the course information and things like that, but in terms of the knowledge itself, it's not really needed. Then antivirus evasion. Now, then we find a discussion about antivirus evasion, which is also definitely interesting, but once again, not really useful for the final exam, because in the final exam, you can use Mimikatz without obfuscating it, without packing it with some packer. It's like you just use Mimikatz and there are no active antivirus to find yourself. This is because the topic is only partially covered in OSCP. It's only mentioned a little bit. There is a specific certification of OSCP that deals with, for example, antivirus evasion, which is the OSCP certification. Then we find the Metasploit framework. Continuing, we find the chapter on the Metasploit framework. Definitely interesting, but not for exam purposes. Now, during the exam, we can use Metasploit, but only for a single machine, meaning that once we use it on that particular server, on that particular machine, we cannot use it on a different machine. So this means essentially you can use multiple times on the same target, but you cannot use it on other targets. In general, however, I think that there is really no need to use Metasploit during the exam. So I suggest to simply not use it at all. Bring it off your mind. You do not need Metasploit to do the exam. So the chapter on Metasploit is interesting, but at the end of the day, you don't need it for the exam. Finishing off, the module Assembling the Pieces describes an example of a penetration test from start to finish. It shows how to perform various activities, and for that, it can be extremely useful. So this is assembling the pieces. It's like there's no new knowledge covered there. It's more like putting the knowledge to the test. It's sort of like reading the penetration, seeing a penetration test like in succession, like one step after the other, and then putting all the pieces together. And this is the assembling the pieces module. And then finishing off the module assembling the pieces, and that's it. The last module then describes how to move forward with the labs, a very useful environment in which to learn all the techniques described so far. And here we mention the challenge labs. And the challenge labs are probably the most fundamental practice you can do. I mean, how did I even come up with this guide? Well, it was simple. I just did almost all the challenge labs. I only didn't do the last one, Skylark, and I did of Skylark a few machines. And I just seen the patterns with respect to the typical vulnerabilities, the typical techniques, and things like that. And I came up with the cheat sheet and with this guide, which has helped me a lot for the exam preparation. Now, in order to prepare well for the exam, all the techniques discussed in the previous section must be tried in real working environments. And this is why one of the most useful things offered by the course is the presence of 6 challenge labs. Each of these labs contains various machines connected within an internal network that can be attacked with the technique showcased in the course. So like you have 6 different labs. Each lab is a different network. And internally, some of these labs contain different subnetworks. So here there could be like subnetwork 1 and subnetwork 2, like the Active Directory subnetwork and the Independent Targets network. So you have 6 different challenge labs, and this is really where you will get most of your practice. To be honest, when I started the course, I went straight to the labs, because I already knew a lot about Linux privilege escalation, about web enumeration and exploitation. The only thing that I didn't know was Windows and Active Directory. I went straight to the labs. Now, if you go straight into the labs, it can be a little bit traumatic, but I think that at the end of the day, that's where you actually learn. I mean, it is useful to read the text modules, to study and things like that, but at the end of the day, the cool thing about OSCP is that it is a practice-oriented certification. It means that no matter how much you study, if at the end of the day you cannot bring in practice what you study, then it's no good. This is why the challenge labs is really, really important. And the useful aspect of the challenge labs is that there is no guidance in them. No one tells you what you should do. Therefore, I suggest you spend a lot of time in those labs. And in particular, I suggest this particular order: MedTech, then Relia, then you do the 3 OSCP A, B, and C, which simulate an exam set, and finally, if you have the time, you can also do Skylark. This is up to you. I don't think you need to do Skylark, because once you've done all those labs, you are prepared, but if you really want to complete, you can also do Skylark. In particular, the OSCP A, B, and C are extremely useful to do before an exam attempt, because they offer the same structure you will find in the final exam. And also, I suggest you take maybe one or two, maybe you take the last one, OSCP-C. I suggest you take your time and try to simulate a 24 hours exam for at least one of these sets. What I did, for example, is I took the last one and I simulated a 24-hour exam. So I went to the computer, I connected to the OSCP VPN, and I started this challenge lab, and I did not finish until the 24 hours were over. This has led me to understand to simulate a real exam situation, so that when the real exam actually came, I was more prepared for it. And also, a key point to note is to remember every command you use for the completion of these labs. Because with these commands, you will build your own personal cheat sheet. That's how I built my personal cheat sheet. I went back, I looked at the command that I use for the completion of these labs, I went to the modules, to the text modules, to see what commands they had there, and I put it all together and I had my cheat sheet. You can find in the link in the description in the GitHub repository, but I suggest that you build your own personal cheat sheet the way you want. Remember, the key is to prepare. Do not improvise. Prepare. Do not improvise. Also, even though the challenge labs have no guidance in them, I highly also suggest you go to the official OffSec Discord, because it is an extremely helpful place to get hints when lost. So you shouldn't waste too much time if you really are stuck in the challenge labs. You should go to the Discord, you should try to get some hint, not like a full solution, but just like some hint, so that you know where you got lost and you can adjust and you can learn. So the Discord is really critical, because if you truly get lost, if you truly get stuck, you go to the Discord and sometimes you realize that what you missed was a very, very, very naive thing, and then you will be able to improve. Like, for example, there was one machine in the challenge labs. At some point, you needed to look into environmental variables. So environment variables. I didn't do that and I was stuck. Then when I understood, okay, I need to look into environment variables, that lesson got stuck in my head, because I was like, I always look at environment variables nowadays. If there is some secret, some password, some resources, some API key, whatever it is, it's useful. And now we can talk about expectations. Now, this is because OSCP is an exam, which means that it simulates a specific scenario, and this specific scenario is being crafted by other humans to test you on specific skills. So when studying for a certification such as the OSCP, you should always ask yourself, okay, what am I being tested on? Because the more precisely you can answer this question, and the higher the probability you will pass the exam. For example, for the specific case of OSCP, I have observed that what OffSec wants you to develop while learning through their Pen 200 course are the following key points. Of course, do these key points exhaust all the expectations? Probably not. Probably I'm missing something here. But if you're able to observe these key points, if you're able to meet these expectations, then you are most likely ready for OSCP. Of course, I also don't really need to say it, but let's just say it. There are uncertainties. Always will be. This is life. We cannot have 100% guaranteed on anything. However, if you focus on these key points, your probability gets so much high that really you're gonna cover most of the uncertainties. Okay, we can start reading these key points. The first one, you are able to use basic enumeration tools in order to understand the security weaknesses of a given system, where the system is either a web application, a Linux server, a Windows server, or an Active Directory network. So we have 4 different technological contexts: web applications, Linux servers, Windows servers, Active Directory network. And we're talking about basic enumeration tools. Nothing too sophisticated, nothing too fancy. Basic enumeration tools to understand the security weaknesses. Now, what kind of security weaknesses? Well, the security weaknesses you need to find do not have to be complex, and this is a key point to understand. They are simple, and they can be either standalone weaknesses, meaning that they only affect a single vulnerable component of the server. For example, an SQL server which allows you to get remote code execution. This is a single vulnerable component. Or they can be obtained by combining 2, at most 3 different aspects of the system under attack. For example, you have an SQL server which allows you to write files within the directory of a web server, and this web server allows you to execute PHP code. We are talking about 2 vulnerable components that put together form a remote code execution, because with the SQL server you write the file in the web directory and then you can execute it. So it's not a single component, it's 2 components, but each component, the vulnerability of each component is sort of simple to understand. By properly enumerating the attack surface, you should be able to discover the weakness or weaknesses of interest. Now, once you have identified a basic security weakness, like for example, I'm able to authenticate to an SQL server with found credentials or with default credentials, you should be able to exploit it in order to get further access into the system. So not only you enumerate and you understand the security weaknesses, but you are also able to exploit them, to use them to get further access. Depending on the characteristics of said weakness, you are supposed to either exploit it manually with simple payloads taught and showcased in the course, or you are supposed to search and find online an existing exploit that will do the job for you. And at most, when you use an already existing exploit, and I've made a video about that, at most you will be required to change a few lines from the exploits you find in order to make them work on your target. And this is really key. So you do basic enumeration, you understand the security weaknesses. So you show OffSec that you have this basic conceptual understanding of what it means to be a security weakness, and also you are able to exploit it either manually using simple payloads like simple SQL injection, simple directory traversals, simple local file inclusion, or you are able to search online the resource in the internet to find exploits written by other security researchers. And in that case, you showcase that you know how to read an existing exploit, how to understand, how to use other exploits and things like that. It still requires some skills, like it doesn't show that you are able to write the exploit yourself, but it shows that you are able to use it, which is still something. Now, apart from using specific exploits which target only a particular technology, you cannot use tools that perform general automatic exploitations such as SQL map. And for Metasploit, there is you can only use it on one machine and that's it. I just suggest you don't use it. The idea is either I have an exploit which targets a specific technology, like a WordPress version Y, I don't know, or another CMS, OpenCart, whatever. It's like, unless you have a specific exploit, you can use that. But if you are using a general automatic exploitation tool, such as SQL map, you cannot use those tools, because OffSec wants to understand that you know the vulnerabilities you're exploiting. Continuing, you need to have a basic yet solid understanding of the most common ways to elevate privileges within Linux and Windows servers. Once again, this comes down to proper enumeration and basic exploitation skills. This time, however, we are not talking about enumeration of web applications and exploitation of web vulnerabilities, but rather we are talking about privilege escalation, privilege elevation within servers. So within Linux servers, within Windows servers. And of course, depending if you are Linux or Windows, it changes the techniques, the methods, the enumeration, and I've made videos about all of these topics. Continuing, you need to be able to use port forwarding techniques in order to use compromised hosts as pivot points to get access into internal networks. This is a key technique you cannot do without. You then need to work with proxy-aware tools that will let you enumerate those internal networks by going through the intermediate proxies. So you need to understand the main techniques that allow you to set up an intermediate proxy. So this is your Kali. This is your proxy, which is a compromised host, and this is an internal network that you want to use. This compromised host has access to this internal network, so this is a network, and with Kali you need to use tools that allow you to go through this internal proxy. Tools like proxy chains. I mean, proxy chains is an example. Maybe there are other tools. Tools like Chisel to create the port forwarding, to create the pivot point. It doesn't matter which tool you use. What matters is that you know how to do these sort of things. Continuing, you need to be aware of the core functionalities of an Active Directory network and how a malicious attacker can exploit such functionality to move around the network after an initial access has been obtained. So the idea is you need to know the basics of Active Directory, you need to know what it is, you need to know what are the typical ways in which, starting from a compromised host within an Active Directory, you enumerate the Active Directory network and you move around, what kind of tool you use, like crackmap.exec for example, Mimigas to get the hashes, how you do techniques such as pass the hash, how you do like Kerber roasting, ASREP roasting, the cheesing attack. We talk about that in the Active Directory video. Finally, you need to be able to collect proper notes and express your findings in understandable ways in order to communicate the various vulnerabilities you found in your activity, the best remediation methods, and how the vulnerability was exploited. So this is the report writing, the latest video other than this. So that's the general idea. If you are able to meet these expectations, you should be prepared for the OSCP exam. Now, of course, here I use a lot of ambiguous words like basic security weaknesses, basic Linux privilege escalation, whatever. I understand that this is not specific. This is why I'm making this video at the end. I've already made an entire guide about this. It's 12 videos, each of which is between 20 minutes to 40 minutes long. So in those videos, I go into the detail about each one of these like context, techniques, and things like that. The general, and one other technique that I did not mention here is about password cracking, how hashing works to protect passwords, and what are the typical ways in which you can crack passwords. But other than that, really, OSCP is all about this sort of knowledge. This goes to show that OSCP, at the end of the day, does not require deep expertise on the subject. It requires, however, to be practical with the subject, to know the subject well enough that you are able to do practically with a real terminal, with a real network, with a real server, all of these things. And this is why SCP is an interesting exam after all. Now we can talk about the final exam and then we will finish with some observation. Let's now tackle topics regarding the final exam. With respect to the structure, this I mentioned many times before, the structure has an Active Directory set, which is made up of 3 machines, MS01, MS02, and DC01, which is the domain controller, and an independent channel set comprised of the remaining 3 servers, which can be either Linux or Windows, you don't know which one you're gonna get. Now to pass, you need 70 points. And the idea is that each independent challenge has two flags, a local.txt flag and a proof.txt flag. The local.txt flag you obtain after you get the foothold within the machine, which means from the external point of view where you enumerate the web surface, the network surface, then you get inside with a reverse shell. At that point, typically, you are able to obtain the local.txt. Then, to get the proof.txt, from the reverse shell, you need to elevate your privilege and you need to become root or administrator. And you will find the proof.txt. Now, each of these flags gives you 10 points. And this means that in total, each independent challenge is worth 20 points. What does this mean? It means that if you do all the set of independent challenges, you're gonna get 20 times 3. Okay, that's 60 points. This means that to pass, you cannot just do this. This is not enough to pass. The Active Directory set instead is worth 40 points. But to get them, you need to complete the entire set, meaning you need to become domain admin within the domain controller server. In total, there are 100 points, because you do 40 plus 60, and this is 100 points. Now, given that the AD part is the part in which you can practice better, because it has a more stable structure, I suggest to start off with this and obtain those juicy 40 points. After you obtain those 40 points, you move forward with the independent targets. Now, having said that, do not invest too much time on a single target, and I repeat, do not invest too much time on a single target. Do that only at the end when you finish everything else. So what's the methodology here? Is that the trick to understand about OSCP is that if you do not get something after 1 to 2 hours, few things can happen. Either you simply did not study or practice enough, which means that you are missing a detail, like you do not have the knowledge, like maybe you do not know that a certain protocol has a UDP port, so you never check for that, which means that it's your ignorance, sort of, that is limiting you, because you have never studied that, you have no idea, you have no information, there is no information in your brain about the fact that, for example, a certain protocol has a UDP port, and this will block you. And this sometimes can happen if you did not study enough in the challenge labs, or if they put you in the exam set something that you never found before. It could happen. Or otherwise, you know everything you need to know, but you're missing a small detail due to stress and general lack of attention. And this is the most dangerous case. Because if you practice enough, this first case, you can probably cover it. But the second one, missing the detail even though you know the stuff, this is the thing you should worry about actually. For example, this is what happened to me. I knew everything I needed to know, but the last machine windows, I missed a really small detail, and this has made me unable to finish the last machine. Otherwise, I would finish the last machine. It was only later, when I was writing the report, that I went back, I took my time, I read the report, and I was like, holy shit, I missed this small detail. And probably the machine was easy after that. In these cases, take a break, do another machine, and when you come back to the one that you got stuck, start from the beginning with a fresh mind. And I really suggest this methodology. So, you pick a target, be the Active Directory part. I suggest you start with the Active Directory, because at the start you will have more energy, probably. So start from that, spend 1 to 2 hours. If you made some progress, keep doing that until you finish. If you have that for the past 1 to 2 hours you made no progress, then you take a small break, so 5 to 10 minutes of break. You take a small break and then you can choose. Either you keep going on to that target or you change target. I suggest you change target at that point, because if you keep stuck on the same target for too much time, that's dangerous, because then you will have less time for other targets, which might be easier for you to do. So try to rotate 1 to 2 hours, progress, you keep going. No progress, you change target and you do a small break. Now, as I said, if you just do the exam, that's it, with the independent challenge, you will not have enough points to pass the exam. However, during the course, you can get bonus points. Now, with the following description, you should now understand that to actually pass the exam, you are forced to complete the Active Directory set. This, however, is not true in general, because outside of the exam, you can get 10 extra points by flagging at least 30 machines within the internal lab environment. And so like those 30 machines come from the challenge labs from MedTech, Relia, OSCP A, B, C, and Skylark. So you need to flag 30 machines and you need to complete at least 80% of the exercise of each module. Because each module has some text, some exercise, and some videos. If you complete at least 80% of the exercise of each module and you flag at least 30 machines, you get 10 extra points. And with these 10 extra points, if you complete all the independent challenge set, you have 60, plus 10, plus 10, you have 70. So you are able to pass. Should you do the bonus points? I think so. I think you should. Why? First of all, you're gonna get a lot of practice, because if you flag at least 30 machines, that's a lot of practice in the challenge labs. And then, by doing the exercise, you're getting exposed to the material of the course, even if you do not read every single line of text. So I think you should do both. Flag at least 30 machines and do at least 80% of the exercise. Before they had a different way of giving the bonus points, I believe that this new way is much better. And so this is it. With the 10 bonus points, you can have much more freedom. Like for example, what I did was, first I did the Active Directory set, then I did an independent target, and at this point in my exam I had 60 points, plus I had the 10 bonus points. So after the first like 4 hours, at around 5 p.m, I already knew that I had passed the exam essentially, because I did the Active Directory, I did the independent target, and I had the 10 bonus points. So this has allowed me more, like less anxiety for the other parts. So then I tried to do another independent target, I failed, then I tried to do the last independent target and I succeeded. So at this point I had like 60, I had like, so this is 60, this is 80, I had 90 points. I couldn't do the last target, so I got no points from the last target, but I had 90 points, so I was gonna pass with if I was able to write the report, of course, because even if you flag everything, be careful, because you need to write the report. The report could be your undoing if you are not careful about that. And the general trick is keep things simple, do not tunnel vision on a single machine. This is what I did. And thankfully it was just one machine which I tunnel vision, and then I stopped myself and I wrote the report. Now, proctoring setup. In terms of proctoring setup, it is quite easy to have everything ready. Just be sure to use Xorg and not Wayland when using Linux. Now, this tip is just if you want to have like a smooth experience. If you are an experienced user, you can use Wayland, there's no worry about that. Just make sure to try out the way you share the screen. Now, the software they use for sharing the screen is called Janus, which is an open source implementation of the WebRTC protocol. Now, for more details, you simply go to the OSCP page. It is well detailed and contains all the information you need. What I did is I found an instance of Janus online, which allowed me to test my screen sharing capability. So if the plugin for my browser worked, I use Chromium, and there is a plugin for Chromium. You can find this in the link of OffSec here. So I just installed that, I tried that, it worked, and that's it. I knew that it was gonna work. And with respect to the proctoring experience, which means sharing your screen and the camera for the entire duration of the exam, even though at first it might seem like invasive, the experience itself is actually pretty smooth. Now, I had no one in my room, I was completely focused on the exam, I had no music, I had nothing else, and it actually allowed me to help focus on the exam itself without distractions. Anytime I went out, I wrote to the proctors, look, I'm going out, I'm taking a break, and they are totally chill with that, at least to me. And they just say, look, when you go out, you tell us, and when you come back, you also tell us, and that's it. I kept my VPN connection open all the time, so it was better, even when I went to sleep. I just turned off the webcam, and so the proctoring experience was actually pretty smooth, and I have nothing to say about it. I was pretty satisfied. And that's it. I hope this blog post was useful. I hope the entire series has been useful in making you understand a little bit more what are the core topics covered by the OSCP. If you think I've missed anything, if you already took the certification and you think, look, you did not talk about this, please let me know, because I've tried with this blog post and with this series to be as complete as possible. I really try to not miss anything. But maybe, of course, I might have missed something. In case, please let me know and I will fix it. Have a good certification if you choose to tackle this, and if you do not, well, just learn the materials by yourself. Because internet is a big place and there are many useful resources out there, and my hope is that I've created just another resource which can be also useful. At the end of the day, it's the knowledge and the methodology you build while learning that matters. Everything else is just a symbol. I mean, of course, the OSCP certification has a lot of social value to it. It can allow you to get a job, which is really important. It's not like just a symbol, meaning that it's not important. But, however, it's not the OSCP symbol that matters. It's the fact that OSCP forces you to learn, to build a sort of methodology, to do a lot of practice. So it is a symbol that is meaningful, that means, look, I am a beginner in this field, but I know my way around. I know my way around tools. I know my way around Linux and Windows privilege escalation. I can understand the basic Active Directory attacks. I can understand the basic techniques for web enumeration and web exploitations. So this is the, I think, idea behind OSCP, and it's why it can be useful to obtain it and to go through the process of learning. However, just understand what is important here. It's the methodology and knowledge, not the certification itself. Because the certification is just a symbol that maybe one day will not be as powerful. However, the knowledge and the methodology will always be powerful no matter what. And this concludes also the series. This, of course, does not end all the material that I want to talk about, because in this blog post, I've discussed a lot of different techniques. And later on, continuing in my YouTube channel, I will make specific videos on the various specific techniques. And so the idea is that, having given this high-level overview of OSCP, having given this structure, this important and meaningful structure on the OSCP certification, we can now focus on the specific knowledge that not only matters for OSCP, but matters in general for a penetration tester. And so that's it. I hope the series was enjoyable. If you found it so, please share it with people who might also appreciate it. If you have any feedback, please leave it in the comments, how I can improve. And see ya to the next video.